Hey, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to respond to something John Lennox said in this Alex O'Connor video. So if you don't know John Lennox, he's been a famous Christian apologist for quite a while now. Genuinely had a big impact on my life. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm just going to play a clip from this interview between him and Alex O'Connor on religion versus a relationship with Jesus. And then I have a couple thoughts to share about it. So let's go.
And, the country I come from, Ireland, but also here, the number of scandals.
Yep.
And people often say to me, well, how could you be a Christian, you coming from Ireland with all the fighting there was, let alone the moral scandals? And I think that's a real question. And my response to it is, and I talked to Christopher Hitchens at great length about this, and he took the point in the end, is that well, what I said to Christopher, Christopher, I don't understand you, because if you'd really understood what Jesus said and said to the religious rogues that were around him, you'd be on his side, not fighting against him. Because all your objections to bad religion, I share. And Christ criticized them. And I said, you talk about Christianity being cause for war. Well, that was what Christ was put on trial for, that he was promoting terrorism. Pilate declared him innocent because, and here's the interesting thing, that I remember discussing with Christopher very clearly. I said, Pilate was threatened by any threat to Rome. And was Jesus a king who was trying to overthrow him politically? And Jesus' answer was, well, I am a king, but not in the sense you mean. To this end, I was born, to this end, I came into the world, that I might bear witness to the truth. And Pilate said, what is truth? And went out and said, Jesus is innocent, because he was bright enough to see what most of us can see, that the one thing you cannot do by force and violence is impose truth, especially if it's truth about salvation, peace with God, forgiveness, a new life, and all this kind of thing.
Yeah. I wanted to react to this clip because John Lennox, first of all, maybe people may remember John Lennox from the early 2000s, but he was a bit of a hero to me. I remember watching him debate people like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, and I was always on John Lennox's corner in those debates, so I always wanted him to win. And whenever I listened to a debate, I think I was pretty sure he had one. So it was really interesting to hear Alex interview John. As a side note, I was at a conference once that John Lennox was speaking at, and I was just probably 17 or something. And I really desperately wanted to talk to him. And every time I tried to go talk to him, something would happen. We'd be in the dinner line, and I'd go to get in line to talk to him. And then all of a sudden we'd have to go off to another room or something. So I never actually got a chance to talk to him in person. Anyway, all that to say, it's John Lennox has been doing the Christian apologetic circle for a while. And I genuinely think he comes across as such a lovely man, and it's really hard to try to go too hard, try to go too, I don't know, you don't feel like you want to fight with him. You feel like you want to listen to him, which is what Alex is doing here. I wanted to share just a thought on what he just said in this clip. And this is sort of like what Alex says too, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot, because I think there's generally, a weird line that a lot of Christians can get into the space of walking, of sort of agreeing that organized religion is really dangerous. Organized Christianity can be really dangerous, can be really, vile for all the reasons he says. But a personal relationship, that an individual relationship with Jesus, whatever that looks like, is completely unimpeachable, and you can't say anything against it. And I mean, I think this argument bothers me on a few different reasons. The one is, I already did a video on it, but the one is that we don't actually have any access to the Christ of faith or the Jesus of history, for that matter, outside of institutions. It really is, when people convert to Christianity. When I converted and said a sinner's prayer at the age of 7, it was because I was socialized by an institution to think about Christianity that way. When I talked to Jesus and believed that Jesus talked back to me, it was because I was socialized by an institution. So the idea that there's institutional Christianity and then my personal faith, I think is a really false, it's a false dichotomy. I think the reality is these two things are more intertwined than we like to realize. And I think part of the problem as well, and I think I see this for evangelicals, this wouldn't be as true in the UK, because in the UK, like the Anglican Church is quite different. But one of the things that happens in a lot of evangelical churches, because they have such a heavy they have such a heavy focus on what they call a personal relationship with Jesus or personal faith, is they don't think there is a system. They fundamentally think like, oh, the Catholics have like a religious system, and we evangelicals, whatever, wouldn't call themselves evangelicals, but Church of Christ or Pentecostals or Brethren or Disciples of Christ, whatever, that we are less systemic. Like we have just a focus on relationship with Jesus, and that's what our church serves to nourish. And I think part of the problem with this, and it's really like sweet to hear John talk about this, and I genuinely think there is like personal spirituality. I'm not trying to take that away. It's something I talk about on my channel. But I think we can't deny the extent to which personal spirituality is always linked to institutionalism, or personal Christianity in this case is linked to institutionalism. And just for an example, I mean, I think in a lot of evangelical churches, to give you a really specific example, what happens if we look at, sex abuse, for example, in Catholic churches, most people see that as institutional failing, that there's something wrong with the Catholic Church that, keeps nourishing these types of sexual predators in the priesthood. But when the same thing happens in evangelical churches, I very rarely hear people say like, oh, this is a systemic failing on the part of evangelical churches, that like somehow our attitudes towards sex and sexuality and male leadership and the celebrity of male pastor culture and all that, people don't usually say like this is a systemic failure. And I think part of the reason is because people don't think there's a system. They just think this is about a relationship with Jesus. So all of a sudden, you don't have a system to criticize. And I think that what John is saying sounds really sweet, that it's just about like, it's about a relationship with Jesus, about knowing Jesus in your heart. And he goes on to talk more about this in the interview. I didn't play the whole thing, but he talks about, this peace with God that he has inside, and this, like relationship that he has to God. And that sounds like a really nice way to think. And I've certainly felt that in my life, and found that to be a nice feeling too when I felt like that. But I think fundamentally, if you are in Christianity, practicing Christianity, like you are always going to be implicated in institutions to some degree. I don't think you can like it's either an institution forming you and forming the way you think about Christianity, or maybe you're giving to an institution, or maybe you're attending a church. Like you can't get away from institutional religion. And I think this is why when you hear like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or whatever, like talk about critiquing religion, they come back to critiquing institutions, and people always say, well, yeah, the institution's gross, but my faith is really nice. And I don't think you can separate those two things. I think personal faith is always linked hand in hand with the institution that nourishes it, or that you pay into with your, by showing up, or by paying offerings or whatever. You can't really link those two, and I think it's a false dichotomy that lets a lot of people off the hook. And then the other thing that I've talked about is the false dichotomy between like the institution and Jesus, that like we don't have the institution, we just have Jesus. And when I think about like the text that John is referring to, that it's really, it's really sweet to say, oh, Jesus stood against religious leaders too. He was, right there with you. But the problem is like our understanding of Jesus has been formed by a religious institution that collected and shaped the texts that we have and that we read, and the way that we understand Jesus. So again, like there's no way to get beyond the institution to get to like the real historical Jesus or whatever. Like we are, and I know modern evangelicalism is based on this premise that we can just know the historical Jesus. Like you don't really need anything else. You can just know Jesus. Maybe they'd say the Christ of faith. I don't know. But the point is like you can get past the institution, and we really can't. Like the institution has formed everything about the way that we see Jesus, from like his mission on earth that was decided. The institution worked out what that was and controlled the way we could talk about it. Jesus' nature, Jesus' interrelationship with God, the Trinity, things like this. Like these are all institutional doctrines, and we don't just have some access to a relationship with Jesus that somehow bypasses all those and is like the real thing. We only experience the real thing because we've been shaped by institutional Christianity. So again, it was really interesting to hear John talk about this stuff. One of the reasons I think we need to keep pushing back against this kind of idea is because these institutions do hurt people. And by just letting people off the hook by saying like, I just have a relationship with Jesus, I know the institution is messed up, but I just love Jesus. It kind of ends up hiding the way that even the way that you just love Jesus, if you go to a church somewhere, if you have any relationship to an institution, that institution does have power on people's lives, real power. And chances are, like, I look at the institution that formed me, that taught me that as a, straight white man, my job was to lead. Like, I had more people telling me that God had told them that I was called than, like, from when I was pretty young. I've had people say, like, God has called you to leadership, all this stuff. Like, it's really nice to hear that as a young man, but, like, do young women get told that? Like, they didn't in the church I came from. Never. Like, God called you to be a wife and a mother is basically what people would say. So, like, is that God's calling on my life, or is it the institution again? So, like, we need to be honest about the fact that that personal relationship with Jesus happens in an institution. It comes from an institution. The way we think about it is shaped by an institution. And also the way that we live out our faith has institutional ramifications that could have other impacts on people's lives. So I would much, like, if I'm thinking about the future of Christianity and the type of Christianity I want to belong to, I would much rather be part of Christianity that recognizes the institution is kind of messed up and say, like, we recognize this has to be institutional, but we want to fight for a better institution. The one that just says, I have a personal relationship with Jesus and the institutions are sort of separate from that. Like, we need to get rid of institutions and get back to personal relationships. No, it's always got to be institutional. So that was just a quick little reaction to John Lennox on Alex O'Connor. It's a cool interview. I'll link to it below. Definitely recommend listening to it. As always, I enjoy pretty much everything Alex does. So check that out and have a great week.